government has a little understanding, I think, really of the problems that businesses face and the risks and so forth. And that is the problem. And it just shows the enormous gap now between business and government.
Is big business finally finding its voice? A number of senior high-profile executives of big major corporates in South Africa are starting to criticize the failures of governance in South Africa. But are they going far enough in questioning the policy frameworks that are causing these problems? Joining me to discuss is Jonathan Katzenellenbogen. He is a writer with the Daily Friend. So Jonathan, you wrote a piece on this topic where you alluded to the fact that businesses are starting to be a bit more vocal in their criticism. What are you observing in the South African business sector at the moment?
I think they're getting so scared and they're getting so worried about the deterioration in the infrastructure, the pothole problem, the power cuts, and so forth, that they're worried about the future of their businesses and South African economic growth. So last week, we had three big bosses from Pick n Pay, Gareth Ackerman, Investec, Fani Titi, the chairman, and Richard Wainwright, and the boss of Standard Bank's investment bank division, all come out and say that things are not going very well. They all had similar criticisms about infrastructure, the power cuts, and so forth. And it was unusual because they don't normally come out on an individual basis and say this. They say, oh, we're worried about growth, we're worried about power cuts, but this was a lot more forceful. The CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, Busi Mavuso, who represents big business in this country, has come out in the past, or quite regularly, and criticized government. But this was individual bosses putting themselves on the line and saying things aren't going well.
All right. Well, it's refreshing to see big business standing up, because we've often seen small business associations like NIASA and Sakiliga being a lot more robust in their criticism. But it seems that big business is coming around. But are they doing enough to really question the underlying policies that are creating these problems in the first place? We often see big business speaking the language of social compacting, had Discovery tacitly endorsing national health insurance. So it's not exactly like there is an overwhelming amount of criticism. It's more bemoaning some of the symptoms of the policy failures.
I think that is an accurate observation. And, one of the reasons is that they're very dependent on government in the end for licenses and regulations, and they're scared. They're scared. They're scared about the future of the country, clearly, and they're scared of government. And they don't have a tradition of really speaking out forthrightly to government. They're very, very cautious. And I suppose they have to be, they would argue, for their shareholders and for themselves, really, and their employees. But they're not giving the details. What is really wrong with Eskom, I think has been proven over and over again, is that they've been under poor management for years. There's massive corruption and so forth. And they don't take the next, and business hasn't taken the next step and really saying, we want privatization of Eskom, it's enough. What they're saying is, of course, we want the private sector to be allowed to, one of the executives said that the private sector should be allowed to generate power up to 500 megawatts from the present 100 megawatts. So that would be an improvement. But they're not saying anything about, they're saying, oh, we're over-regulated. What specifically are the regulations they're pointing to? One of them clearly would, are they even hinting that BEE might be a problem in finding sufficient suppliers to meet their requirements? So I think, to be brave, they have to go the next step and lay it all out. What do they really mean?
Yeah, but we see the consequences of sticking your neck out. So last week we had the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Gwede Mantashe, hinting that Sibanye Stillwater, the gold miner that is locked in a ongoing labor dispute. I think it's 10 weeks now that there's been strike activity there. Mantashe is saying, well, we might revoke Sibanye's mining license. I mean, that just shows you the hostility towards business. The big business sector perhaps has reason for caution and concern there, Jonathan.
Absolutely. I think it came on cue, and it proved the point that business is making, that the business environment is very poor in the country, and you have a government that is not sympathetic or helpful. What Mantashe could do is rather try and urge the two parties to reach a deal, but he's not doing that. He's blaming it all on Sibanye. Does he really want to withdraw their licenses? They're a very well-managed company, and they've created many, many jobs by opening mines that many in the industry thought should be closed. So, there we go. The government has a little understanding, I think, really of the problems that businesses face and the risks and so forth. And that is the problem. And it just shows the enormous gap now between business and government.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've observed is that the current administration favors this language of social compacting. Business has been very keen to go along with that. But actually what that ends up doing is just supporting and ratifying the policies that are so inhibiting of commercial activity and of economic growth. So in some ways, business needs to decouple itself from this idea of the social compact and more aggressively assert its interests and say, well, actually, we need to approach government more on a transactional basis rather than on a consensus basis.
Yes, I think that is a very good point. And they're drawn into these social compacts against their will and better judgment. So, for instance, they've had this master plan for the steel industry. They're having master plans for all the industries. And part of that often is a localization component, which some businesses want, but for the South African economy as a whole, it's going to lead to higher prices and great cost pressures. And social compacts are, why do you need them? There's no tangible reason or rationale for social compacts. Where do they really get you? I think just they should really focus on improving the business environment. But the ANC has this vision of society divided into labor and business, and that they can bring together the two and to make decisions. But why should labor have an influence even on business planning? It might be a very good idea to bring in individual labor leaders into the boardroom, but at a sort of policy level, I don't see the point really.
Right, and Mr. Ramaphosa, the president, has also alluded in a recent policy discussion document to new policy frameworks. Just as we close this conversation, Jonathan, do you think that there is any realization coming from within the ANC and within government about need to change policy?
Well, if you look at the 188-page discussion document that the ANC issued ahead of its policy conference in June, July, it's same old, really. There's no indication of new frameworks. And the evidence of this is really in the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, saying again last week, as if proving the point of business, that he would never privatize Denel because of security and strategic implications. Well, in the US and the UK, the big defense contractors are all in private hands, and they are in many, many other countries.
Well, Jonathan Katzenellenbogen, thank you very much. We did actually do a video on that discussion document earlier in the week. So if you would like to check that out, you can click over here. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.